Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we take all that scattered research, the articles, your own notes, and we fuse them into a really crisp, coherent understanding of a single, complex topic.
We cut through the noise.
We do. We give you that ultimate shortcut to being well-informed. And today we are stepping away from the geopolitical map for a bit. We're diving into maybe the most complex landscape of all.
Human psyche.
Exactly. And we're going to view it through the lens of a character whose story is just a masterclass in psychological resilience.
That's right. Today's deep dive is all about the source material detailing the psychology of Avatar Korra. We're essentially using her life as a case study.
Right.
A case study for understanding these monumental concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma, identity crisis, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and, the brutally messy process of actually healing from that.
And this isn't just about analyzing a fictional hero, is it?
Not at all. It's about extracting these universal psychological nuggets and learning what happens when a person's, deeply ingrained sense of self is violently and repeatedly just shattered.
Our mission today is pretty ambitious. We want to understand the foundational mechanisms of identity formation.
And how trauma can physically and mentally disconnect a survivor from their own body.
And also how true nonlinear recovery act, the thing that defines Korra's entire journey, from her earliest moments to her final hard-won victory, is this tension. She spent years struggling to separate what she thought she wanted, a life of simple, powerful certainty, from what holds
that destiny laid out for her by generations past.
Exactly.
And she was born into this cosmic, religiously justified role, the Avatar, imbued with maximum responsibility and immense power from birth.
We're going to explore the psychological consequences when that external destiny provides strength and immense self-effort first.
Right. It
ultimately becomes the very instrument of her psychological destruction. She then has to redefine her entire existence without the crutches of that old idea.
A monumental task.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start right at the beginning, at the root of the problem.
The rigidity.
The rigidity of an identity that arrived fully formed, bypassing all the necessary steps of self-discovery.
Korra starts with an identity that is strong, undeniably capable, but tragically rigid. And to understand why that creates such a problem, we need to look at the psychological categories of identity formation our sources deep. There are about 4 main buckets.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So first, you have your personal identity. This is your goals, your core values, your individual beliefs.
The internal stuff.
The internal stuff, yes.
Yeah.
Second, relational identity. How you define yourself in the context of others. Are you a protector, a friend, a mentor?
Mm-hmm.
Third is collective identity. So indexing yourself within social, like being a waterbender or a citizen of Republic City. And finally, you have public identity, the conscious presentation and sort of monitoring of yourself in public settings.
And for most people, those 4 identities are developed gradually over time, right?
Yes, exactly. They often pull in slightly different direction, which creates a flexible, nuanced sense of self.
But with Korra, all 4 of those boxes were they were overwhelmingly checked with the same single non-negotiable term, the Avatar.
Precisely. Her entire system of self-worth, her abilities, her specialness, her independence, her strength, it was all tied up in being the Avatar. And it was continually reinforced and rewarded, especially by the White Lotus,
who were basically her lifelong personal security detail and PR team combined.
That's a good way to put it. She was positioned as the ultimate authority, and her goals, values, and beliefs were all filtered through that singular lens of cosmic duty.
What's fascinating here is that most children, they spend years in this psychological playground of adolescence. They try on different roles. They figure out who they are through trial and error.
The natural process of identity formation.
Right. But Korra, from age 4, was already bending 3 elements and declaring herself the Avatar. She skipped that whole step entirely.
She jumped immediately into identity maintenance, which is generally what adults do.
Yeah.
It's the process of preserving an already settled desired identity in the face of change or challenge.
So for a developing person, skipping that exploration phase and committing so early, that's what psychologists call identity foreclosure.
Yes.
Identity foreclosure. That sounds incredibly risky. It implies she made a commitment without the genuine internal questioning that gives an identity resilience.
That's absolutely key. Identity foreclosure is a premature, often forceful commitment to specific values, goals, or roles, usually determined by powerful external forces.
And in her case, the Avatar role is fundamentally a religiously justified destiny.
It is. The expectation is imposed on her before she had the cognitive or emotional development to question it, to explore alternatives, or to even decide if that path aligned with her own internal needs.
So what does that premature commitment produce psychologically?
Well, it creates an overly rigid identity. The internal dialogue essentially becomes, my self-worth is defined by this one role. This makes it incredibly difficult for her to define any self-worth outside of that avatar structure.
So if she's not the most powerful bender, if she's not the bridge between worlds, if she's not the one solving the world's problems,
Then what value does she possess? The question becomes terrifying for her.
Because if the avatar role is the only source of her worth, then questioning her performance in that role is the same as questioning her entire existence. That's the trap of ontological necessity.
It is. The sources talk about this rigidity as a system that becomes ontologically necessary for her. The system, the world, it needs the avatar to survive and function. Therefore, fitting into that system perfectly becomes ontologically necessary for Korra's personal validity.
So to step outside of it, to fail in it, or even to just imagine a life separate from it,
it means questioning the validity of the entire spiritual and political structure of her world and her place in it. It's an unthinkable thought.
And that pressure cooker environment, with the White Lotus constantly reinforcing her specialness and strength, it ensures she internalized burden.
It makes it impossible for her to separate her genuine internal desires from the overwhelming weight of what she has been told she needs.
And this leads directly to her intense dependence on external validation.
Absolutely. Since her identity is externally imposed, it must be externally confirmed. She needs the world and every adversary she faces to constantly affirm that she is indeed the powerful, useful avatar she's supposed to be.
We see this so clearly in her participation in probending. It's not just a hobby for her. It's a desperate psychological need.
Exactly. Our sources highlight probending as a clear mechanism for seeking that external validation. It's brutal, competitive, and it has clear winners and losers.
And she needs to win.
By dominating the arena, she attempts to affirm her supreme bender status and, by extension, her entire worth. She needs those wins and that crowd approval to confirm that the identity she was forced into, the powerful, dominant bender, is still valid.
She spent her formative years filling the boots of generations past, convinced they were her own. This maximum, unrelenting responsibility taken on from the earliest age essentially sets her up for a catastrophic psychological failure when that role is finally challenged.
Right. She has no fallback, no just Korra to rely on.
Which brings us to the moment she steps into Republic City, the first context where her rigid identity simply does not fit the reality situation.
And everything begins to unravel.
So Korra arrives in Republic City expecting a clear black and white world, the kind of world she studied in history, scrolls about Aang and the Fire Lord.
A single massive villain she can punch her way through.
Exactly. Instead, she finds herself facing complex political negotiations, profound social unrest, and this generational conflict between benders and not.
And this is that critical moment where her prepared identity meets the wrong environment. This results in what we call role strain and role confusion.
Her identity was optimized for decisive leadership and raw power.
A tool set that was entirely ill-suited for the complex reality of a modern, democratic, and fundamentally broken society.
She learned very quickly that her bending couldn't solve political gridlock.
Or resolve deep-seated social issues. Her ultimate authority, which was supposed to impress and unify everyone, was instantly dismissed.
I mean, think about that scene where she tries to stop she shows up ready for a fight.
And the police chief arrests.
Right. And later, she tries to enter a council meeting and they tell her, this is a closed meeting. Her authority is functionally non-existent in a bureaucracy.
And that is crushing for someone whose self-efficacy is built on her authority being absolute and her power being decisive.
And the irony is just devastating. She, the avatar and the ultimate bender, is facing an anti-bending revolution.
She's not seen as the solution. She is the ultimate symbol of the problem. That high initial self-efficacy, the belief that she is capable of affecting change, is instantly and thoroughly challenged by every single interaction.
It's the prodigy trap.
That's a perfect. Korra is the quintessential gifted kid who internalized the highest possible expectations.
So when her performance doesn't match the ideal, when her authority is ignored, or she can't use force to solve a political problem, she immediately assumes the failure rests entirely.
Right. Rather than recognizing that the role itself might be flawed or the context is just too complicated for a simple solution.
Because if the identity is flawed, then her entire existence is flawed.
Exactly. Therefore, the identity must be perfect, and she must simply be failing to measure up.
And this cognitive dissonance, this is what leads directly to maladaptive.
It does. Our sources are very clear on this. For Korra, any mistake is internalized as a massive, catastrophic failure. She measures her self-worth against these impossible standards, the legacy of 10,000 years of avatars.
So she avoids setting realistic goals.
Because that would signal to herself and the world that she is letting go of that perfect avatar ideal. She clings desperately to it.
And this perfectionism is highly domain-specific, isn't it?
Oh, very. She has these impossible standards for fighting, raw power, and leadership, the things the avatar is meant to do instantly and flawlessly.
But she's noticeably less perfectionistic and more patient in areas where her identity wasn't so rigidly defined.
Like learning airbending or, much later, spirituality to different domains, so the pressure's different.
This domain-specific perfectionism, it explains her initial recklessness, doesn't it? Her aggressive attempts to force reality to match her identity.
Like challenging Aemon to a duel.
Or confronting Tarlok head-on.
That behavior isn't confident. It's overexertion and recklessness driven by the need for validation. She needs to prove, through overwhelming physical dominance, that she is the competent, independent avatar whose power dwarfs everyone else.
So the fear of failure is actually what drives her toward these increasingly risky confrontations.
Because only a victory, a decisive one, can alleviate that underlying self-doubt caused by her inability to solve the city's political crisis.
Now let's tie this back to her framework for understanding outcome, her locus of control.
Initially, Korra has a profoundly rigid internal focus when it comes to locus of control. She believes all outcomes are, or at least should be, within her capacity to affect because she is the avatar.
And that's the source of her initial high self-efficacy. She sees herself as the primary cause of every.
But when she continually fails, Aemon escapes her, Tarlok manipulates her, the political scene stays chaotic, that internal focus flips the script.
But it doesn't flip to her recognizing external constraints, which would be helpful.
No, it crystallizes into overwhelming guilt and self-blame. She doesn't have the psychological mechanism to say, that outcome was outside my control, and that's okay.
All she hears in her head is, I failed because I wasn't strong enough or fast enough or spiritual enough.
But wait, I mean, if she is the avatar, isn't it true that most world-altering events are her responsibility? How does she psychologically reconcile the reality of her cosmic responsibility with the need for a healthy, flexible internal perspective?
That is the core conflict that drives her entire mental health crisis.
Right. Our sources suggest that a healthy internal locus of control is necessary for self-efficacy, but it has to be balanced by external awareness. Korra's internal focus is pathological because she lacks the humility or the coping skills to differentiate.
To differentiate between what she can influence, her actions, her training,
and what is fundamentally a systemic generational problem beyond any one person's immediate fix, the result is just psychologically crushing.
Believing everything is your fault, but simultaneously losing faith in your ability to fix any of it.
And that sets the stage for the first major deconstruction of her identity.
That deconstruction begins with Aemon, the man who presents an existential threat not just to her life, but to the very foundation of her.
Aemon's threat is entirely psychological. He targets her self-schemas.
The deep, fundamental assumptions we hold about ourselves.
Exactly. And her most critical schema is, I am a skilled and powerful bender. When Aemon takes her bending, he instantly, violently undoes.
It's the swift, brutal loss of the one thing that made her useful, valuable, and purposeful to the world.
And this action leads to a total collapse of her ego integrity. Ego integrity, in psychological terms, is that healthy narrative, the coherent story of self that integrates our successes, our failures, our flaws into a meaningful whole.
When Aemon strips her of her core ability, that narrative vanishes.
All that remains is despair.
We see that despair so clearly in that infamous scene where she flees to the wilderness. She pushes Mako away,
saying he doesn't need to do her any favors now that she's powerless.
Right. Her friendships, her relationships, her worth in her mind, all of it was conditional on her avatar status.
That moment at the cliff's edge is the psychological nadir of Season 1. The despair is rooted in the complete loss of her core role and context. If she can't be the competent, powerful avatar, she perceives her own existence as pointless.
Which illustrates the danger of identity foreclosure perfectly. When the forced identity is removed, there's nothing left underneath to anchor her self-worth.
Now, here's the tricky part, and our sources analyze this critically. Aang restores her powers almost immediately.
He unlocks airbending and the avatar.
And this quick fix is crucial and arguably damaging to her long-term development.
How so?
Because the reversal of the trauma happens so quickly, Korra resists the painful opportunity to fundamentally reconsider who she is outside of her power. It becomes a massive win in identity.
So instead of being forced to confront her non-bender self, she just reinforced the rigid identity she already had.
Exactly. She can breathe a sigh of relief and say, I maintained myself. I got through that blip. The experience, instead of broadening her perspective, reinforces her deep-seated belief that power is the ultimate arbiter of worth.
She swears never again.
Which is not a vow to seek balance, but a vow to cling to her identity even harder, ensuring she never feels that powerless shame again. She gained the spiritual connection, but her relationship with her power was ultimately unchanged. She just doubled down on the need for it.
The real permanent loss, however, is reserved for the end of Season 2 with Unalaq.
Severing her connection to Rava and the past avatars.
Yeah.
This is where the internal crisis escalates dramatically, because this is a permanent permanent, non-reversible failure. This is almost worse than losing bending because it undermines the very definition of the avatar she foreclosed on.
She hasn't just failed the present.
She has failed the entire 10,000-year legacy of the past and the future of the cycle.
The damage is profound. Her self-schemas are utterly shattered, and she can't rely on a quick, magical recovery this time.
She is forced into genuine role renegotiation.
And this is where Tenzin steps in with a moment of real therapeutic intervention. Our sources analyze this through the lens of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
He tells her, let go of your attachment to who you think you are. You have always been strong, unyielding, and fearless.
She's performing cognitive restructuring.
He is. He is deconstructing her automatic critical self-assumption, that damaging schema that says, I am only worthy because of Rava and the past avatar. He's trying to broaden her identity by pointing out stable personal traits, strength, fearlessness, that exists separate from her historical spiritual title.
The fundamental question he's making her face, if the cycle is broken, if she is no longer connected to the past, is she still the...
Is her worth dependent on that historical power? Or does her worth come from her individual character?
And the healing requires her to look at that foundational schema. I am powerful and valuable because I am the avatar, and transform it.
It's a painful process, but it's necessary. By meditating at the Tree of Time and taking the time to question the narrative she built for herself, she begins to develop a new, more flexible and resilient self-concept.
So she emerges from season 2 having undergone the beginning of true role renegotiation.
Yes. She develops a new relational and public identity. She begins to see herself less as the ultimate authority figure and more as Korra, the individual who stands up and fights when the moment counts.
She finds self-efficacy built around her perseverance and moral conviction,
rather than simply her bending prowess.
But, as we know, the path is layered. While she internalized the lesson that her character is stronger than her title, she still maintained that rigidly internal locus of control.
Believing she could and must control the outcome of every major global conflict.
And that crack in the foundation was just waiting for the definitive, life-altering trauma.
Which is precisely what Zahir delivered.
The end of season 3, the confrontation with Zahir and the Red Lotus, this is the shift that moves Korra from an identity crisis into full psychological collapse.
This is a mere...
No, this is psychological warfare and physical terror.
We need to detail the sequence because the invasiveness is so crucial. She's captured, chained, and forcibly poisoned with mercury.
The goal was to force her into the avatar state and then kill her, ending the cycle forever.
It's an explicit, defined act of bodily and psychological violation.
The trauma is uniquely personal. They injected mercury into her blood. Her greatest strength, the avatar state, her ultimate spiritual defense, was turned against her.
This violates the most sacred bound, bodily autonomy. And the sources connect this back to Unalaq's violation of her spiritual autonomy when he tore Rava out. For a person whose identity is built on supreme physical competence, having her own body hijacked, controlled, and used as a weapon against her own will is uniquely traumatizing.
She was utterly powerless and dependent in the hands of her enemies.
And the immediate psychological consequence is severe dissociation. She no longer feels safe inside her own skin.
Torture fundamentally disrupts the body's natural harmony. It forces this agonizing, heightened awareness of the pain, the weakness, the dependence.
For Korra, her body, which was her source of pride, became a symbol of vulnerability and betrayal. And traumatized individuals often learn to detach, to ignore their gut feelings, or numb awareness as a strategy to reclaim some semblance of control when they were otherwise powerless.
We see that dissociation manifesting in her inability to do basic self-care. She can't dress herself, she can't cook, her body is a foreign, dangerous thing she cannot rely on.
And this feeds into the deeper chronic shame that defines the next phase of her life. We have to distinguish between the prior failures and this new crisis. Losing bending to Amon or Rava to Unalaq caused state shame.
State shame being a temporary feeling based on a situational failure, like, I have failed.
Exactly. It's situational, temporary, and potentially recoverable. But the poisoning, the torture, the forced helplessness that causes trait shame.
This is chronic, self-defining, and pervasive.
Her new self-schema becomes, I am a failed avatar. I am fundamentally broken. The shame deepens the gulf between the perfect ideal and her perceived reality.
And the narrative compounds this trait shame through role erasure. The world moves on without her, essentially confirming her new schema of being obsolete.
3 years pass, and the world hasn't collapsed. In fact, in many ways, it seems to be managing fine without the Avatar. The Airbenders have taken over global peacekeeping.
And Kuvira, the ambitious usurper, is making radical, decisive choices that would once have required the Avatar's authority.
Everyone around her assures her they are fine, which, to Korra's traumatized mind, confirms that her role, and thus she herself, is unnecessary.
That is utterly devastating when your entire psychological structure is built on being necessary and indispensable. And this cycles back to her low control.
The locus of control shifts again, but not healthfully. She moves from being rigidly internal, I control everything, to unhealthfully external, feeling that outcomes are progressively beyond her control.
Like the world is too messy, things are happening without my input.
Yes, but she can't escape the guilt.
That's the paradox of chronic shame.
It is. Even though she feels powerless, the ingrained guilt and trait shame insist that her failure, her current weakness, her inability to stop Kuvira from rising is somehow still her personal responsibility anyway.
She has lost her power, her status, her body, and her purpose simultaneously,
resulting in a state of chronic active psychological pain.
This intense internal conflict forces her. She lies to her parents, she cuts off her closest friends, Mako and Bolin, and seeks out remote places where nobody knows her name.
Isolation is her chosen coping mechanism.
And it serves a crucial dual psychological function. First, it acts as a shielding mechanism.
Right. Her self-worth depends entirely on being a beacon of strength and competence. The pity she perceives in others' eyes is agonizing and reinforces her shame. Isolation removes that painful social mirror.
And second, it's a way of softening shame.
Yes. In the anonymity of the Earth Kingdom back alleys, where she is just a mysterious waterbender, the social context that makes her trait shame relevant, the expectation of the perfect avatar.
And our sources suggest that keeping the details of the violation secret is a classic defense mechanism.
It is, and it's often rooted in shame over her perceived inability to withstand the torture, and an intensely loyal desire to shield her loved ones from the burden and horror of what she endured.
The loneliness of authority, which she felt even before the trauma, now dictates that she has to shoulder this immense internal burden.
Sharing her struggle, even with Katara, feels like a failure of duty.
And we see the profound impact this trauma has had on her cognition.
Oh, definitely. Torture, like the psychological distress she experienced, interferes with working memory and high-level thinking. She remains stuck in the persistent present, unable to effectively reflect on her situation or plan a meaningful future.
Which is why she refuses help from medical professionals like Katara.
She lacks trust in institutions, and she just cannot bear the shame of admitting she needs external help to fix what she perceives as a fundamental internal moral failure.
It's the ultimate attempt to physically reshape her environment, symbolized by cutting her hair and discarding her water tribe armband.
Those are radical physical changes common after trauma.
An attempt to reshape the body that felt like betrayed her.
But lacking a healthy, flexible identity to fall back on, she turns to high-risk, self-destructive behaviors to regulate her intense emotions and reclaim some bodily control.
Initially, that's self-punishment. Barely sleeping, barely eating. The internal things she can control when the external world is chaos.
But as the feeling of stagnation sets in, the sense that her body isn't obeying her mind, she escalates to cage fighting.
These brutal, fast-paced fights afford her a sense of control and a painful, visceral connection to reality.
The pain she chooses.
The sources highlight a specific visual. In the fights, she is often confronting a shadowy, chained version of herself. This isn't just fighting, it's a profound internal confrontation.
That is textbook trauma reenact. She is involuntarily, repeatedly reliving and recreating the past trauma, the chains, the attack, the feeling of desperation in an attempt to master it.
She chooses to put herself back into a controlled, violent situation.
Believing her problem is simply one of willpower and skill. If physical therapy and meditation didn't work, maybe winning these brutal, self-inflicted battles will finally defeat the trauma and force her body back into obedience.
She is trying to punch her way out of PTSD.
And that need for mastery over the past suggests her struggle is far more complex than just standard PTSD. It points, as our sources state, toward complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD.
Right. CPTSD is diagnosed when trauma is caused by a chain of sequential or prolonged traumatic events, not just a single incident.
And Aman, Unalak, and Zahir all compounded, filtering through each other to create this continuous devastating narrative of failure and vulnerability.
So let's break down how Korra meets the criteria for CPTSD.
Well, first we see the intrusion symptom. These are involuntary, sensory-driven re-experiences of the trauma.
The hallucinations, the nightmares, the flashes of the chained avatar state.
These aren't just memory, they are physiological hijack. Her body instantly reproduces the fear and physical responses of the original event, plunging her back into the moment of torture.
Then there's the negative alterations in cognition and mood.
She fits this perfectly. Profound self-hatred, exaggerated self-blame, decreased interest in the things she once loved, and feeling intensely isolated. The trait shame is the engine here.
And her inability to recall key features of the trauma, the dissociation.
And her profound difficulty engaging in basic self-care, maintaining relationships, and regulating her emotions, that demonstrates functional significance. Her CPTSD is actively interfering with nearly every facet of her life.
And her isolation and self-destructive behaviors, the cage fights, her constant flight, that all falls under the avoidance criteria.
Including the compulsion to reenact the very trauma she is trying to avoid.
We can also analyze this through the lens of combat trauma.
We can. Korra's identity is founded on duty, authority, and high-stakes sacrifice, similar to military veterans. Her body is engaged in a battle long after the conflict is over, making it impossible for her to simply return to a peaceful existence.
And the hallucination of her chained, hyper-powerful avatar self.
It's the ultimate externalization of her internal war. The part of her that was supposed to be invincible is now her biggest threat and the source of her weakness.
It's the constant reminder of her greatest vulnerability, wrapped in the image of her greatest power. It's an incredibly painful circular narrative.
And the most satisfying element of her story is the absolute realism of her recovery. It's not a single training montage.
No, it is messy, nonlinear, and full of
And that nonlinearity is the profound truth of healing from CPTSD. Our sources emphasize that Korra's recovery process shows the failure of focusing solely on reclaiming the former self.
She spent years pursuing quick fixes, believing that if she could just restore her physical strength, she would be...
She tried it all. Physio and water healing from Katara, believing physical strength equals mental cure.
Meditating and visiting the spirit world, thinking the damage was only spiritual.
And cage fighting, trying to force her body into a beat. All failed because the damage was systemic. It ran deeper than the physical or spiritual domains alone.
She even convinced herself that the mercury was the single simple cause of her entire mental struggle. Get the poison out, and the trauma goes with it.
And Toph removes the physical poison, which is a massive relief. But Korra is immediately frustrated because she is not suddenly cured.
She's optimistic, but her body and mind remain profoundly unsynchronized.
And this is the crucial moment of realization. She cannot simply overpower the psychological damage through willpower or raw determination alone. She has to evolve her relationship with her body and mind, accepting that the trauma has fundamentally altered.
And the path to true healing requires facing the source of the trauma itself, which leads her to confront Zahir in prison.
This is a classic therapeutic technique, exposure therapy. It involves confronting and reframing the traumatic experience in a safe, controlled environment. By choosing to face the man who violated her, she is slowly diminishing the anxiety and avoidance behaviors that were maintained by her fear of him and the memories he represents.
She goes there with a very clear objective, doesn't she? To prove he has no power.
I came here to look you in the eye and tell you that you have no power over me. I will no longer be scared of you.
It's an attempt to shift her locus of control from the external Zahir controls my fear back to the internal I control my fear.
And this confrontation, paired with Toph's earlier work teaching her to metal bend the lingering poison out of her system, focuses on symptom mastery and effect tolerance.
She's developing new coping mechanisms so that traumatic triggers like the sound of chains or the mention of airbenders no longer instantly overwhelm her defense.
She is learning to manage her flashbacks, not erase them.
And the ultimate realization, the core of her growth, is that she couldn't outrun or overpower the trauma. She had to learn to live alongside it.
That acceptance is the path to growth. When we are stripped bare by suffering, we become open to the greatest change, and this culminates in post-traumatic growth.
This describes profound, positive psychological resulting from grappling with deeply painful experiences.
Right. It doesn't mean the trauma was worth it, but rather that the individual found a way to use the experience to create new meaning.
And our sources identify 5 areas, We see all of them in Korra's.
The first, and perhaps most immediate, is spiritual change. She reconnects with her spiritual side, first with Toph at the Banyan Grove, and then Zahir inadvertently guiding her spirit world, where she finally reconnects with Rava and the cycle.
She spent so much time focused on raw physical power.
But true healing begins when she allows herself to reconnect with the non-physical, accepting the spiritual loss and choosing to start a new cycle.
She finds improved relation. Her reliance on Asami, Bolin, and Moko shifts from external validation to genuine reliance.
She accepts their pity, which is now reframed as compassion, and allows herself to be vulnerable, which strengthens her relational identity.
We see a newfound appreciation for life, a sense of gratitude for simply being alive and capable, separate from her grand destiny,
which feeds a sense of new possibilities for her future. She is no longer limited by the rigid, foreclosed identity of the past. She is free to define her future on her own,
which leads to her decision to travel the world and explore her relationship.
And finally, a clear sense of personal strength. Her final victory over Kuvira is not through physical dominance, but through spirit bending, a power born from compassion and spiritual connection.
Her strength is found in her empathy, her wisdom, her sense of justice, separated entirely from her raw bender power.
This culminates in meaning-making. This is the final step, where the survivor assigns new meaning to their trauma and integrates it into a new self-narrative. We see this meaning-making in her final act, understanding Kuvira.
She doesn't just defeat her, she reaches out.
She recognizes the wounded, scared parts of Kuvira, the desire to cling to control and power because of feeling powerless, and sees a reflection of her own earlier struggles with control and identity.
By recognizing that fear in her enemy, she reimagines the Avatar's mission with profound compassion and empathy.
Accepting the role of global negotiator and healer, not just global war.
She was stripped of every external marker, her bending was compromised, her past lives were severed, her role was erased, yet she ends up with the strongest, most flexible, and passionate identity.
The result is a genuinely healthy, flexible identity. She rebuilds self-efficacy around her moral fortitude and perseverance, not her power. She adopts a flexible locus of control, understanding what is her responsibility and what is genuinely beyond her control.
And critically, she relinquishes the guilt and trait shame built on damaging self-schemas, adopting a realistic view of herself as deserving of self-care, love, and fulfillment separate from her death.
This journey is just a masterclass in psychological survival. It is not about becoming who you were before the trauma.
It is about coming to terms with who you are now, integrating that pain into a new, stronger, and more resilient identity. It is finding the strength to keep going when you feel that crushing shame, when you've lost everything, and choosing to be brave when you are most afraid.
That transformation from the rigid, externally validated prodigy to the empathetic, resilient leader who acknowledges her own human needs provides a powerful model for all of us. It shows us what happens when we are stripped of every external marker we use to define our worth, our job, our status, our competence, or our context.
Korra's journey demonstrates that finding strength lies in simply being a human who needs a hand up and then turning around to help someone else up in turn.
So what does this all mean for you? We all face our own versions of high expectations and the gifted kid trap.
In a world of increasing information overload, constant connectivity, and relentless pressure to perform, how often do you default to identity maintenance?
How often do you cling to the rigid roles and external validation, the job title, the perfect family image, the status you've always known, rather than allowing yourself the painful but necessary process of identity formation and role renegotiation when life inevitably challenges your core self-schema? It's something profound to mull over until our next deep dive.